Hey, good morning. I want to welcome all of you here on the first floor, on the second floor, and the 10th floor. Those of you online, thanks for joining us on January 1st, the first Sunday, the first day of 2023. We're going to be talking about different things. I'm Rick Bates, and I'm going to be introducing this series where we talk about resolutions, and I'm happy to be with you. But I want to start this way. I'm going to say three words for you, and you on this floor and on the other floors and online, say them back, all right? Three words. I say them first, you say them second. Got that? Pretty simple. Here we go. Three words. Happy New Year. It's a great new year. I hope it is a good new year for you. And we want to talk about resolutions to begin with. The title of my sermon is Beyond Resolutions, but I want to talk about resolutions. And I looked online and just found some quotes because this time of year is when, whether we make them or not, we all think about resolutions. So here's just some quotes from online, kind of a fun way to get us started. Here's one resolution from quite a ways back. Ring out the false, ring in the true. Pretty good, right? Most of us like to get rid of the stuff that's bad and move toward the good stuff. That's why we have resolutions. Resolutions are kind of reactionary. They kind of say, I want to do this more. So some of the New Year's resolutions maybe you're thinking of, I certainly think about these. I want to lose weight. I want to exercise more. I want to eat healthier. I want to travel more. I want to spend more time with family and friends. I want to be more successful. We all have these kind of resolutions we make to kind of get rid of. Let's get this and let's move ahead. What about this quote? Stop procrastinating so much. That's the resolution. Next line. I'll post the rest tomorrow or maybe the day after. In other words, I'm not going to keep my resolution. I'm not going to stop procrastinating. That's what happens with many of our resolutions. In fact, studies have shown that 60 to 70% of resolutions people make are not kept for longer than 1 month. Within 1 month, they've given it up. They're not going to stop procrastinating. They're not going to post it and that kind of thing. Another quote, just to kind of get us started thinking about resolutions. Every year, you make a resolution to change yourself. This year, make a resolution to be yourself. That's pretty good. In fact, there's a new book out. It's called Atomic Habits. I don't know if any of you say it, but it's a book that tells us we ought to look at the stuff that's inside of us. We ought to use that, and we ought to have identity-based habits. If we have identity-based habits, then it's better to keep them because we want to let them come from our inner identity rather than these other things around us. A good kind of quote. A few more quotes. One, my New Year's resolution is to stop lying to myself about making lifestyle changes. I'm just not going to lie about this. That's my resolution, to stop saying I'm going to do all this and do that. And one way that people do this, we mentioned it earlier, is these one words. Instead of making things about, change, let's make one lifestyle change. One thing we're going to think about, one word. And words are great to use. Maybe you might want to think about this. Do you want to have compassion for next year? How about gratitude? How about hope? I like this one. How about laughter? Let's just have more laughter next year and you be part of that. Or here's my favorite one. How about this word for next year so that we can have a life? Pause. We can use that in Hong Kong and around the world, just to pause. That's a good one maybe. So one more quote about resolutions, quotes that are found online. Character is the ability to carry out a good resolution long after the excitement moment has passed. Long after, more than 1 month, it really helps. And it's based in character. And this moves us to what we want to talk about today, is beyond resolution. We want to move beyond that to talk about resolve. We want to talk about, the title is called I Resolve. You'll be hearing 3 sermons. Today's the first one about I Resolve. Does it mean to resolve? And so I did what many of you do. I don't know whether you do this in today's world. It's great in today's world. If you got a word you want to understand, where do you look? Wikipedia. So here's what I found. If you look, there's what resolve is. The determination to do what you have decided to do, or you decide to refrain from something, to decide an issue with confidence and clarity. Some of the words that you can find that mean resolve are words like this: to straighten out, to hammer out, to set right, to settle on a plan. These kind of things, to straighten out, to hammer out, to set right, to settle on a plan. This determination that I'm going to do something different, or I'm going to refrain from doing something, and I'm going to do that with some confidence and clarity about what that's about. That's what resolve is all about. So, in trying to help us today to talk about resolve, where do you go? Here's where I'm going. I'm going to go to the Bible. I've chosen a Bible character, a person who I believe shows us what resolve is about. He actually demonstrates it if we just read the story of this. What is resolve about? Maybe the word's not there, but can we see how this person was resolved? Now, the person I'm chosen to use is Daniel. Some of you know fascinating stories in the book of Daniel. Daniel was one of the prophets, one of the people that were around after the exile when Jerusalem was in this exile and taken away to Babylon for many, many years. He's one of the persons there, and I want to talk about it. Some fascinating stories I'm going to share with you, actually, two of them. But to begin with, I want to introduce this my own way, and one reason maybe why I chose Daniel is because of this. These are my three children. They're all adults now in their 30s. They don't look quite like this anymore. But these are my three children. My oldest, this one, his name is Daniel. We named him Daniel after the book of Daniel and some of the stories there. And what we did with each of our children, we chose a Bible character, and then we did have stuffed animals we collected, and we chose one character, one stuffed animal to go with that character. And the one we chose for Daniel, maybe you can guess if you know the stories of Daniel. For Daniel, the stuffed animal we chose, I have one of them right here, is a stuffed lion. And you know, people began to learn, oh, Daniel collects lions. So we had hundreds of these things. We've given them away and changed. We don't have that. This is one I've kept because we're going to look at one of the stories about Daniel. And if you're familiar with it, I've got a slide here to show you. It's Daniel and the Lion's Den. One of the stories that show the resolve of Daniel, and it's recorded in a very good way. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to just tell you the story, not all of it. I encourage you to read these. But here, it's a historical account, but it's told as a story, this amazing structure that would fit any kind of arc, you know, and people that make movies know how to have story arcs. You got to have the hero and the arch villain. You got to have these kind of things. But it's a great story that's put together well to tell the history of what happened with Daniel in the lion's den. So it begins at the beginning. This is found in chapter 6 of Daniel. There's other stories in there before this and after that, fascinating stories. But it begins by telling that Daniel is successful. It uses the word distinguished. So it reminds us that Daniel has been and is a distinguished person. He's kind of the hero. He's the protagonist. Then it goes right on and tells you that there's a conspiracy against Daniel by the bad guys. And this is all the other people in the court that are trying to vie for position. They don't like Daniel. They don't like him rising, and they want to have a conspiracy against him. But then we're told that they can't find anything wrong with Daniel. They can't find anything. But then they notice him praying. He's a good Hebrew still. He prays 3 times a day, and they notice this. So they use that against him because they want to have this conspiracy. So they go to the king then. It's a new king that's there, Darius. And they go to the king and they say, hey, everyone should be total allegiance to you. So you should make a vow to say that anybody who's found praying to another god other than you ought to be put to death and thrown into the lion's den where that's what we use for our punishment to kill people. And the king says, okay, that sounds okay. Then they come back later and say to him, oh, by the way, king. Now the king liked Daniel. He was distinguished. He liked him. He said, by the way, Daniel's praying to another god, and so you had to put him in the lion's den. And the king says, oh, okay, I guess so. The next part of the story is him actually calling for the execution of Daniel. But when he does this and bring Daniel, interesting little phrase the king uses. He says to Daniel, as he puts him in this lion den, he says to you, may your God rescue you. So he says that, but the story is Daniel 6:16. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel, and they threw him into the lion's den. And the next part of the story, the next arc in the story is that God delivers him. We're told that God sends an angel and it closes the mouths of the lions. And so Daniel is kept safe there. And then that part of the story, that arc in it, we actually have the king coming. He thought he's lost Daniel. He's worried about this. So he opens up and he kind of yells down and says, Daniel, are you there? And here's the response of Daniel. God sent his angel to me and shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight. Which leads to the next part of the story as the king reverses his decision, brings Daniel out and rewards him, takes the antagonists who had this conspiracy and lied about things. He throws them into the lion's den, And it's an awful account. They're devoured by the lions and told their families thrown in. They're really awful in those days. So that part of the story. And then the final chapter is this. The king, because of this, because of Daniel's resolve to pray and still honor the king in the midst of that, we find that there's a royal proclamation. King Darius said this, in all my royal dominion, people are to fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God enduring forever. So Daniel's resolve, his obedience, his faithfulness led to changes in that culture at that time because he was faithful to God and God was faithful to him in delivering him. It's a great story. I really like it. But you know, if you read it, I'd encourage you to read it. It's the kind of thing you could see in movies because it's all kinds of stuff going on in this short story. But I like what I learned as a child, the simplicity part of the story that doesn't get into all the gory details and all the conspiracy. And it's shown this way. This is Daniel and the lions. And I just like this one. It kind of captures the heart of this and what we look for. It's Daniel, who's, by the way, do you remember Daniel, what the word name means? God is my judge. That's the name Daniel. God is my judge. Daniel saw that God was his judge. He'll honor God, who's supremely and has sovereignty. So we'll honor God, and that leads to this kind of thing with God taking care of the animals. God is sovereign over the animal kingdom and mankind, and it's just kind of this restful, peaceful scene. You see the light coming in from up above when they open it, but also showing that God is the God of light and peace. I just like this. It demonstrates a powerful part of the story about what happened because of Daniel's resolve. I'm going to put my friend here over here because I want to move on to a second story. That's a great story about resolve, but there's a better one that sets this whole thing by going to actually the first chapter. In the first chapter, all of Daniel has great stories, and I want to tell you a second one that's not quite as familiar, but it's really intriguing and good, and that is Daniel as a handsome, intelligent youth. Daniel was a beautiful-looking man. He was really a prime person, which is why the king took him into captivity. So this happens in chapter 1. We're told as the background for this, that this is a time when Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king over Babylon, and Babylon was this rich kingdom, and they became that way by taking these other places and going and destroying them and taking the best people and bringing them back to the homeland of Babylon. And this was true in 605. Nebuchadnezzar went into Jerusalem, destroyed Jerusalem, and he took the best young people with him. And there were 4 of them he took. Their names we hear later are Daniel, and maybe you've heard of the others. There's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There's some great stories about them that come after chapter 1. But he takes them back to Babylon, where they're given this kind of course in how to be the best Babylonian, how to be taught and actually indoctrinated into our beliefs and our culture so that you can become future leader. This was his strategy. He got kids, they were told in history from 15 to 25, these young, the best. If you look in the Bible, the words that were used for Daniel are that he was certainly handsome, he was diligent in his education, he had no physical defect, he was well informed, and he was quick to understand. That he was one of 4 young men that had these potential that were taken back to Babylon. Babylon was this beautiful place, this great cultural center. If you know about the 7 wonders of the ancient world, Babylon had the Hanging Gardens. They were very well established as a leader in the world at this time. And Daniel's taken back there and brought up in the royal court and groomed and everything. And then comes a time when he's taken as part of his training in to be part of the royal court. And when he's there, he served these banquet meals that are amazing. You know, the smells and the good stuff. I mean, he's a poor person coming and he's all of a sudden around this rich food and wine and all this luxury. And then we find this interesting part of the story about this in chapter 1. Here we go. Chapter 1:8. Daniel resolved, there's our word resolve, not to defile himself with royal food and wine. Well, what's going on here? Well, Babylon was not the same as where he came from. It wasn't formed in belief about one God. They had 8 temples, I believe, 8 large temples, and each temple was dedicated to a god. And part of the work in those temples was to take food and sacrifice it and make it good for that god. It was to take wine and serve it to those. So Daniel, who was raised as a Hebrew man, saying a young man from his childhood, that we have dietary laws that tell us what to do. And our dietary laws for the Hebrews were, you take grains, you take vegetables, you take water. Kind of fits them. But suddenly Daniel's at this place with all this stuff around him, and it says, he resolved not to defile himself because he knows and believes the connection of what is here with idol worship and other gods, and he wants to stay firm with one God. So he decides that he won't do this. And he actually goes and he asks the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. And of course, this scares the leader. What am I going to do? This is what we do around here. You have to have this. I'm told to train you and indoctrinate you in the ways, and you need to eat of this rich bounty. That's what we do here. And Daniel, in his wisdom, proposed a compromise to help this official go to the king and find out what to do. And here's his compromise. Let's have a 10-day experiment. Take all the young people, there's him and four, and there's all these other young people who they're educating and bringing up in this court, and you take them after 10 days and sees who's better. And the guy says, okay, so he goes to the king, he finds he can do this. So after 10 days, he examines these, and we find out that Daniel and these others are healthier and stronger than the counterparts. And so they continue to say, you don't have to take of the food and wine. You can stay on healthy water, vegetables, and grains. So all of you who believe in healthy diets have some back there you can go to. But Daniel did it because of his belief in God and his religious faith. I've got to keep my faith and be resolved in what God. And we're told that Daniel became one of the king's most trusted counselors in the coming years. Now, here's what I believe is behind this. Daniel had resolve because he thought about things that he was raised in. So let me give you one of the things that he might have had on his mind. We don't know for sure, but I believe it was. Proverbs 1:7 says this, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And Daniel was raised on faith in lots of scriptures, but I believe this one tells him that, hey, if I'm going to do something, I have to make sure I abide by God, who's the beginning of knowledge. So whatever Nebuchadnezzar throws at me, whatever these people teach me, whatever they do, I take that in. But the beginning of real knowledge for me, the beginning of my resolution, my clarity, will be what God has instructed me in my Jewish faith, and he was true to that. It's amazing to me how Daniel was able, in his culture at his time, with this massive culture coming against him, to maintain cultural relevance. He related to him. He was civil in what he did, but he also did not have spiritual irreverence. He also stayed with spiritual things in his life. And the word actually here, resolved, if you look at the Hebrew, it's a little clear what it says. If one of the translations of the Hebrew in English is that you purpose in your heart, that you set your heart on something. This is what Daniel did. He purposed, he set his heart. He had this purpose that came from his center place in life that gave him resolve to maintain his faith and keep to that. He knew that God was his judge and was evidenced in his life. So what I want to do is take those stories. You have Daniel, who continued to pray 3 times a day in light of maybe losing his life. You have Daniel, who doesn't eat this but provides a compromise and does something different. He resolved to be true to his faith. What does that mean for us? What can we draw out of those stories? And so I have here a definition I want to give you. This is a little sharpened from just going to Wikipedia. This is my definition, kind of form and thinking about this. What does it mean for us to have resolve as we enter 2023? And here's what I think. Confident, consistent actions grounded in worked out character. I believe this typifies Daniel's life. There are other stories that in his very character, he had worked out from the beginning of time as a child. It stayed with him. These things which gave him a confidence so that he had consistent actions. In various situations, there was consistency to him living out his life with what we call resolve. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to help you understand this. So here's our problem I think we have in the church often. We hear these stories and we get them, and they're kind of fascinating. I want to do this. But how do we apply that? How do we apply what we learned from Daniel or from other stories, from this word resolve? How do we actually apply it to our life? And here's what I kind of worked on. That resolve is multifaceted. There's different ways to look at it. It's a word we don't use. We knew New Year's resolutions only this time, but we don't walk around saying, I resolve. We just don't do the title of this sermon. But if we were, how can I help you and help myself get handles on this that grab me and help me understand what to do? And what I came up with was that the word resolve can be looked at from three vantage points that are part of our personhood, from the past, the present, and the future. And I just want to give you these and share with you my attempt to understand how can we as a church and you individually have resolve. So the first way that we can have resolve is to ask this question: are you convicted by the past? One way we know we have resolved is how it relates to our convictions that are based in the past. Daniel had an amazing way of living out from his heart and also keeping bad things from entering into him. That's why we have the verse about Daniel saying, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with taking in bad things. So part of this is a conviction based in what we've learned through experience of what not to take in and what to give out. And this is a complicated thing in some ways, but we need to do it. So Daniel had this, I would say, bone deep resolve that had been formed from his past experiences. We can't read a lot about them. They're not there, but they did come from his Hebrew faith that was part of his life when he was taken away to this foreign culture with all these demands upon him. So in the midst of this, what I want to do is share with you about myself and how I have some convictions based in my past. And here's what I believe about convictions from the past. There are things in our past that we have to not do what was modeled for us. We have to change that because something wasn't right about it. Or we have to have convictions that we live out because it's good stuff that we've learned. And with my dad, I have one of both of these I want to share with you. That my dad gave me a lot of stuff in raising me, but there was one thing that I changed. I did not like the direction he went. And so I had resolved to do something. And one thing, I liked what he did, and I kept it in my life. The first one is something I changed. My dad was tight with money. Grew up in the Depression and all this, so he was very tight with money. We'd go on trips and vacations. I couldn't get anything. We couldn't get anything from him. So I decided I got to change in this, because he was very tough on saving money and getting things so he could eventually give it out and never really made it the way he wanted to. So here, one of the things I have that I came with, I resolve, I've done this for years, to make giving more important than getting. Giving is just important to me. And my wife and I have established this in our life from our early marriage. One way we give is to make sure we allow for others. We call that church tithing. So we had a very simple budget. I don't know what you guys do. My budget was very simple. 80% to live on. However, we have to divide that with rent and everything. 10% to save for emergencies and other things. And 10% we give to the church because giving is important. So we began to give to the church. We have a simple lifestyle. We've managed this for years. We still use this lifestyle. I'll admit, with my kids were getting ready for college and in college, the savings dipped down pretty low, but we didn't change the 10% of the church. We've just always done this. Now, here's what happened. There was a day when my brother is a believer in Christ, but he didn't like the church too much. So he didn't like this tithing thing. He's a committed Christian, but he just didn't like that. I did. So we had, it's my younger brother. We're 2 years different. I would talk to him every time. So we were talking on the phone one time. And we were talking about, and I was about 12 years or 15 years into paying for a house in Richmond, Virginia. We'd had years before that, and we'd always been tithing. And I happened to say to my brother, I said, I wish we owned our house right now, because I was facing maybe a second mortgage to kind of make this work. I wish, and here's my brother's response. If you hadn't been tithing to the church all these years, you would own a mansion by now. He just said that, and I'm thinking, okay. And I kind of talked with him. Then I went away. And I took a sheet of paper out, and I'd never done this. I just took from the beginning of our marriage how much I'd given in tithing and other places that we'd supported. I was depressed for a whole day. I had given so much money. I could have bought my house and maybe another half of house, and we could have gone on vacation. It was a massive amount of money. So he was right. Didn't do it. And here's what, about after a day, maybe a half a day, I came back to, you know what? I'm happy with my life. I resolved that giving and giving to the church is important. In fact, I want to follow, Paul wrote this in Acts 20. We must help the weak and remember the words of Jesus Christ, how he himself said, it is more blessed to give than receive. And I went to bed and lived my life. I told Chris later, I said, I'm happy with where I am. I really am. And I'm happy with what? Because I don't know when I get to eternity all that I contribute to. I don't have a clue where all that went. I know where I think it went. But I believe I contributed to a much better cause by changing, by not following my dad and saying, I'm going to give to worthy causes and to the church of Christ. That's going to be a resolve. Now, a second thing I did with my dad, I kept something that he gave us. He taught me as the oldest son to be responsible. At the first, I hated this. I'm responsible to the kids. I'm responsible to this. I remember later on, it took me some years to kind of grab onto and say, I'm happy that I wrote here, I resolve to be responsible in all I do, and it's part of my life, and I'm very happy for that. What I didn't know is how much it affected my children. So a quick story, Daniel, when he was in high school, my Daniel, who's named after Daniel, God is my judge, he honors God. He was in high school, sophomore year, about 16. He got a job in a mall, it was called a pretzel maker, one of these little shops, a small shop in a mall where you go and get a pretzel. They have different flavors and stuff, and he was there working that. And about 2 weeks in, I was going to pick him up. He said, Dad, you need to pick me up a couple hours later because I'm closing tonight. I'm the manager. I said, how can you be a manager? He showed me the keys. He takes care of the cash. He's 16 years old. And I said, Daniel, how can you do that? He said, I'm the only employee there who is responsible. And I began to talk with him how irresponsible other friends were. They just don't have responsibility. And all my children are very responsible, I believe, because what my dad gave me, I've passed on, that there's a value to being resolved, to being responsible. So I don't know what you need to consider, but convictions come because of experience we have for Daniel, experience he had. He let them influence him in things that came his way. And it's good to have convictions that are grounded. So do you have areas of your life where you want to think this year? Again, we got a 3-week series, so you got time to think about I resolve. Are there areas you need to have convictions in either doing away with something or grabbing onto something? It's a good thing to think about and deal with. Number 2, do you have confidence for the future? Here's another one that's very important. Daniel had a confidence for the future. He believed in his future and that God would be his judge and take care of him in an unknown future when things came his way. But I want to use another Bible character that I believe is kind of shows this idea of the future better than Daniel, and that is Paul. I'm not going to have time to give you the quotes and all the explanation of it, but in history, Paul the Apostle, some things were happening, and he resolved, there's the word resolved again, in the Spirit to go and pass Macedonia, which was the plans of the people he was with, and go to Jerusalem. And then it says, and eventually he said, I want to go to Rome. He didn't know how long it would take. When he did reach Rome, do you know what happened in Rome? He died there, so it's not the best thing. But Paul had this view, this resolution of where he was headed in life and how it should change. And there's an important concept here that we don't find in Daniel, but it's important for understanding, I think, confidence in the future, and that is in the Spirit. That often you resolve things in the Spirit with things you don't know. The spiritual world is important, especially for our future. We have to have dependency and belief in what God can do into the future. And I really believe this and believe that God gifts us. We're told that we have spiritual gifts. By the way, if you want to examine your spiritual gift, I'm going to talk about mine in a minute. But if you want to examine it, you can go online under What We Believe on our website, and there's a spiritual inventory you can take to find out what your spiritual gifts, God gives these us for the benefit of his church. And God gave me a gift that I didn't realize was so important until I started paying attention to it and others began to talk about it. And that is, I have the spiritual gift of faith. And I didn't know what that meant. I knew what the other things meant about administration, about some other things I can do. But I'm resolved to live out the spiritual gift of faith. This happened when I was a counselor to people and missionaries. When they had trouble, I had this ability to have faith that if they stayed with God, they'd be okay. In our church, we've had a long history here, and we've faced some things that are unknown, and how can we have confidence? In fact, right now we're facing one of them with bold faith. How can we have confidence for the future in the midst of the reality of the cost of the building and the government and the land and all that? How can we do that? Because I have a gift of faith that God works that out. In fact, in my office, if you come, I have this poster that was got at some family conference. The number one line says, God's in control. And when I feel like I'm getting lost, I just look at that and say, okay, God's in control. I can handle whatever's thrown my way or people. I can have this confidence in the future. I make no mistake, when we become a believer, the Spirit is given us. Jesus said this. Jesus said, when he was just before he left the planet. He said, Father, give to them another comforter, even the Spirit of truth, who the world cannot receive. We receive the Spirit. I believe it's known for us in spiritual gifts and other ways. And if we want to have confidence for the future, there is this spiritual core that helps us have confidence in eternity that we know is coming, and everything is around that. And so we can make some changes along the way. It's important. So, do you have in your life some area where you have confidence that maybe is beyond what you get bombarded with, beyond what other people think of you, but you have a real confidence in the future? And it's especially true when we're grounded in the Spirit and what God tells us and leads us to do. One final way. What about the present? Here's what I believe of the present. There has to be clarity and consistency in your present. So in the past, you have convictions. Convictions come or birth. You can't have conviction unless they're birthed by some kind of experiences. And then for the future, you have to have confidence in it, even when it's not seen, or else you get lost in things. But for the present, both clarity and consistency. And Daniel had both of these. Had clarity to understand, what do I do about praying? I keep praying. I have to understand that's what I do. Clarity, I'm going to keep the dietary laws of the Hebrew faith, and I'll help these other people understand and give them an experiment so they can save face and it'll be okay, and I can keep doing this. He had clarity to understand what to do. And also, though, it takes consistency over time. In any present moment, you need to have clarity to understand the situation, but you need consistency over time. And I want to share with you both of these. First, about clarity. How do you understand this? Now, one of my resolutions earlier, it's not so much now because my children are all adults now, but there's still an aspect of this. But I resolved to be a great parent. That was one of I want to be a great parent. But things come upon you when they're younger. And so I want to share with you a time when I had to have clarity of understanding how I can be a great parent in the midst of what happens. And all of us need this. When things come our way, the more we can understand in this present moment, this situation, like Daniel had or like the story, how do we have clarity in this? It's a funny story. It sounds bad, but that's a good ending. Nobody gets hurt, but it's really a good story, I think, about how I had to have clarity of understanding. It's back when Daniel was in about 9 and Toby was about 5. And I had him for the day on a Saturday. I drive a Volkswagen Beetle Bug, a red one, a very small car, and I drive that. And I have them with me. And I remember I forgot a file at work that I need for Monday. So in going out somewhere, I'll stop by work because nobody will be there. And I have a key to the front door. And my office was just around the corner, so I could get there pretty quickly. And the children would still be safe. So we got there. I told them to wait in the car. They complained. I said, okay. And there was nearby a flagpole. I said, well, stay around the car in the flagpole. It's a parking lot. No one's around. Stay right there. I'll be back in a couple of minutes. So I go inside. I get the file. I come out. They're there. I see them. I feel good. I'm locking the door so I can leave. And I say, hey, kids, stop fooling around and get in the car. And there's some movement. But then when I turn around, I notice Daniel is chasing Toby. So I kind of yell at him, Daniel. But I was going to say, get in the car. But when I said that, I kind of struck him hard. And he was right behind Toby. And Toby was right in front of this pole. The flagpole has this concrete mass around it that comes up so high to hold the pole. And Toby was right in front of it. Daniel was behind him. When he hears my word, he turned around and pushed Toby. And Toby went head first for it into the concrete mass. And I'm looking at this, and blood is, I had never seen, I don't know enough about how bad it is. Found that it's not that serious in some ways. There's a lot of blood, but it's not that. I didn't know that. I just know my blood is gushing out. I'm in the middle of, there's no cell phones. No cell phones at this time. I have to get to the hospital. I have to do something. So I'm getting them in the car. I can't find anything to put on Toby's head. So I have a shirt on. It's the summer. I have shorts and sandals, and I have a T-shirt. I take my T-shirt off. I wrap it around his head, and I'm holding it to keep the blood in because he just doesn't want to help with it. I get him in my car. I'm going to drive and hold his thing, but it's a manual transmission. So I want to hold this, steer, and so Daniel's in the back seat, and I'm telling Daniel, okay, when I say go, you pull that knob back toward you, and then he has to go to third, and I'm holding and driving and trying to get to the hospital, and it's just bizarre. And we go through these signs, and I tell him to go to second, but he went to fourth, and the things are grinding, and I'm trying to figure this out. So then I tell him to put it in this gear, and I try to, can you hold Toby? No, I don't want to do that, Dad. He's having fun doing this. And it was just hilarious, But we did get to the hospital. And I walk in without a shirt on, holding my kids. They go back. They give him 4 or 5 stitches. He's as good as new. And it's a fun story to tell about. I have to have clarity. My job is to get to the hospital. I have to have clear understanding. There's no other way. I don't have any choice in this, and I have to live with the reality of what I have. We have to have clarity of understanding. But in a larger way, over time, those things don't work. We need a consistency. And for consistency over time, for your clarity, it has to be on larger issues. While you need clarity to understand, that's why I tell the story, you also need larger views. And here's where I have a resolution to be just like Paul. Paul wrote this about his larger view of clarity and consistency over time in the present. He said, while I was with you, I resolved, there's the word again, to know nothing except Jesus Christ, Messiah, and him crucified. What he's saying is, this is the center place for me. This is my heart set on this. This is my purpose. This is what I'm resolved to know this beyond all else. And I believe that truly. I believe that we need resolution. This is the consistency part. It doesn't help us when the crisis comes, but it does help us overall to be the framework from which we operate. And I truly believe we need this. So, question here is there clarity for you? Do you have clarity of understanding about what some of your jobs are, some of your work is? Do you have consistency that's present, this larger view that helps you in the present? We need to have this as believers. So, today, as we have this first sermon on I Resolve, I want you to be helped in how do I practically work this out myself. And I give you this definition again. Resolve is this confident, consistent actions that are grounded in what we work out in our person. And I hope that can be true for you. I hope you can find ways. And I hope looking at those 3 things, past, present, and future, convictions, confidence, clarity, consistency, those help you with this word resolve so that you can find ways to say, I resolve something. I am so pleased to be a person who does all I can and to use what I can to communicate. But sometimes there's people who write words that I believe capture me deep down. It has the essence of it, but it doesn't have the word resolve. So I want to share with you a quote from a man named John Piper. If you know John Piper, if not, it's not important. The quote is what I like. I believe this quote talks about Christian resolve. I believe it gives the foundation. I believe it captures the spirit of what I believe in. Whatever you do, find God-centered, Christ-exalting, Bible-saturated passion for your life. And find your way in life to say it, to live for it, to die for it. And you will make a difference that lasts. You will not waste your life. I love this quote. Daniel was God-centered. Out of his heart and everything, he was God-centered. Paul, maybe the best individual you can read, Paul was constantly exalting Christ. And Bible-saturated, that's what we try to do in this church. That's why we go to stories from Daniel, to saturate you, to give you Bible input which changes us. I really do think if you want to have resolve, you can follow those 3 questions. They might help you practically. But whatever you do, find the God-centered, Christ-exalting, Bible-saturated passion in your life. Find your way, say it, live for it, even die for it, like that Paul did, and you will make a difference that lasts. You will not waste your life. I would encourage you to use this series about I Resolve to have things in your life you resolve, not New Year's resolutions, those are okay, but have a genuine resolve to change things and be things. I am so thankful that today, as we do this, as we talk about resolve, we can do it in the context of worship, and we can do it leading to communion. I know nothing better about this church that I like, in that we are Christ-centered, and that all we do here is centered in this person of Christ. I spent a lot of time in my early life working with how can I believe in Jesus' death and resurrection with all, and I came established. And you may want to go to this workshop coming up, this presentation coming up on the real Jesus. You have to have a firm view of this, but Christ is the center of all we do, and we're going to have a time of communion in a minute because we are a God-centered and God-serving, a Christ-centered and Christ-serving church. And I hope today will be a time both from this message and from communion that comes for you to be established in your faith as we continue to be a God-centered, Christ-exalting, Bible-saturated church. God, I thank you so much for all that you give us and all that you do for us. I thank you for how you lead us in so many ways, in so many things that can help us. And God, I simply ask that on this day, we be resolved in this moment to use this time of communion, that we use this time to really help us focus on who you are and what you mean for us. God, I thank you so much for what you've done in my life to help me have resolve and help us as a congregation to have that. Help us to understand what it means to be resolved. Help us understand what it means to have consistency, courage, clarity, conviction, and confidence. Help us to be people known by you, and help us as we continue in worship to use this time online and on the other floors and here on the first floor to celebrate and be with Christ in this wonderful time of communion. And I pray this in Christ's name. Amen.